From Chapter 16 of The Sun in the Morning by M.M.K. I can't remember who took me into the temple, except that it was an elderly Indian who we had some connection with. Not a priest, because I would have remembered the clothes, and memory holds a clear picture of a burly, gray-haired man wearing a small gold-embroidered cap and with a thick woolen shawl wrapped about his shoulders, for even in the plains the night can be very chilly in December. I remember a lot of oil lamps and the blaze of a fire that lit up a small dusty square, crowded with stalls selling sweetmeats and hot food and brightly colored clay figurines. There was a big peepul tree growing out of the center of a brick platform on which more people sat and talked and smoked hookahs in the firelight, and surrounding shops and houses were blotched and checkered with leaping black shadows against a moonless sky in which fireworks made streaks and splashes and showers of varicolored light. I remember, too, that there was some argument over whether or not I should be allowed into the temple, but the man in the shawl, who was obviously a person of authority, said there was no harm, and together we climbed a flight of steps and went in under a stone archway, decked with tinsel and paper flowers and innumerable charag that flickered and glowed from every possible niche in the carved stone. Charags always lit in time of festival, and there was one being celebrated that night, though I don't remember what it was. Certainly not one of the major ones. This was only a modest affair, and probably in honor of some minor and strict local deity. I remember the temple, like the square outside, as a patchwork of shadows and shimmering, smoke-filled, golden light that smelt of jasmine and incense and fading marigolds. There was a fire here, too, that fizzed and crackled as a priest fed it with oil and crumbs of incense, and another priest chanted mantras. I remember how cold the stone felt to my feet. I had, of course, left my shoes outside, and how the oil lamps in the fire made the tinsel decorations glitter. One of the priests put a tilak, a scarlet mark, on my forehead, and I remember leaving as an offering a whole silver 4 anna piece, an enormous sum to me in those days when my pocket money was once 1 anna a week. I have been in other temples since then, many of them far larger and older and more impressive, but none of them ever gave me such a feeling of awe and wonder and holiness as this small and relatively unimportant one in a village near the old and evil battlefield of Panipat. That particular Christmas camp was, like most others, a week-long affair, planned to end the day after Boxing Day. But as Father could not be away for more than 3 days, he and Mother had offered us the choice of spending the entire week there, in which case Father would come out on Christmas Eve and return with us on Boxing Day, or of spending Christmas at Curzon House, in which case he would come to Panipat with us and bring us back with him on Christmas Eve. Since we had not realized at that time that the Slaters and their children would be asked to join the camp, and that Bargy and Tony would be there, Bets and I had elected for the second option. Our reasons being that Panipat lacked the allure of Okhla and the river and sounded pretty dull, whereas back in Curzon House there would be a Christmas tree to decorate, and, more important, a proper fireplace. We were always slightly uneasy about hanging up our stockings in a tent, for even if Father Christmas was able to trace us to our camp, as Mother assured us he would, how would he be able to deliver the goods on schedule if there were no chimney to come down? Besides, Takla would be home every evening, so taking all this into consideration, we had plumped for returning to Delhi. But when the time came to leave, I, for one, wished very much that we had chosen differently, for I had enjoyed myself so much at Panipat, and having Bargy here had been an unexpected and delightful bonus. I hated leaving her in the camp, and the landowner and his family, and Panipat. But it was too late to change our plans, because knowing that we would be leaving, others had been asked to take our place in our tents for the extra days. I still remember vividly the deep depression and regret I felt as I waved goodbye to them all, and which stayed with me all the way back to Delhi. A regret that was made deeper by the knowledge that I myself had made a wrong and irreversible decision and had no one to blame but myself. I would come to that same bleak conclusion all too often in the future, as I suppose everyone is bound to do, and I can only conclude that the reason I remember it so clearly is because this was the first time it happened to me. Fortunately, my gloom did not outlast the arrival of the Christmas tree at our rooms in Curzon House that same afternoon. It was a splendid one that only just allowed space for a Christmas star to be fastened to the top, after it was firmly planted in a huge copper coal scuttle. That done, we all went gaily off to the Lauquila to buy tangerines, which were always available at that season from a stall in the Red Fort's own bazaar, 2 rows of small shops that face each other from either side of the long covered arcade that leads out of the vast double-storied entrance hall that is the anteroom of the main gate of Jahangir's fortress palace. These tangerines were a part of Christmas, and to this day the sight, and more particularly the sharp, spicy scent of them, always reminds me of Christmas in India and conjures up a picture of the shadowy, sun-splashed Lauquila arcade. The Christmas tree, by family tradition, Bryson, I suspect, not Kay, was decorated late on Christmas Eve, long after the children had hung up their stockings, said their prayers, and were safely asleep. We would go off to bed, leaving it an ordinary fir tree stuck in its tub, and wake up next morning to find it glittering with silver bells, glass balls, and spun glass baubles, strings of tinsel, Christmas crackers, cotton wool snow, and innumerable brightly colored little candles. It was a sight that never lost its magic for us. The most exciting moment of the day, though, was when we woke up in the very early morning and, crawling to the end of our beds, groped in the dawn darkness for the stockings we had hung up on the previous night. There was always the fear that this time we might have been forgotten, and felt them bulging with those little parcels and topped by 2 or 3 crackers. Those stockings were a delight, for every single item was wrapped separately in different colored tissue paper, so that one had the added thrill of opening them one by one. Small Indian-made toys and trinkets, bought off stalls in the bazaars or at melas, by mothers during the past year and hoarded for this occasion, none of them costing more than an anna or 2, and each one an enchanting artifact. Crackers stuck out at the top of each stocking, and there was always an orange in the toe and an apple in the heel, with nuts and sweets in between, and a packet of those little gray sticks that crackle and fizzle and spit out showers of silver stars when you light the top with a match. And somewhere in my stocking would be, year after year, an adorable biscuit china, cherub, or angel with real hair, each one different from the last. These little figurines, in contrast with the rest of the toys, cost a whole rupee, for they were made in Bavaria and sold in Rago Mole's shop in the Chandi Chowk, Delhi's famous silver street. By the time I left India to go to school, I had managed to collect 7 of them. But alas, they all perished with so much else in that disastrous fire at the Elephant and Castle. The larger presents were always given to us when we burst in on our parents to hand them their parcels and share the chota hazri. And after breakfast there were the dalis, flat tinsel-bedecked baskets of gilded Indian sweets, fruit and nuts and flowers, presented to us by proprietors of shops where we had an account, head clerks in father's office, and our servants to mark the occasion. Sometimes the dalis contained money tucked away among the flowers or hidden under the fruit, and sometimes there were jewels for mother or expensive toys or trinkets for Bets and myself. These could never be kept, however alluring, since they constituted a bribe, and the taking of bribes was most strictly forbidden. The only gifts one was allowed to accept were perishable ones, fruits and flowers and things to eat. I had heard of British officials who regarded those expensive gifts as insults and returned them with loud, rude words, and worst of others who accepted them and said nothing. But father would always return them with the polite pretense, if it was money, that it must have dropped out of the donor's pocket by mistake, or in the case of jewelry or any valuable present, with warm thanks for having been given the chance of handling and admiring such a charming object. The point was taken, and there were no hard feelings. But oh, I would dearly have liked to have kept some of those expensive toys. Among them, once, there was a French doll with a Paris wardrobe and eyes that opened and shut, which I longed to possess and handled with enormous admiration before regretfully giving it back. Gifts from close Indian friends were of course a different matter. For one thing, the givers had no axe to grind, and for another, one reciprocated with gifts of equal value on their special festivals, as well as on birthdays and weddings. After the presentation of the dalis and all the thank yous, we would put on our Sunday best hats, which were white solar topis of the mushroom variety with removable and washable covers of white broderie anglaise, and leave Curzon House on foot to walk to church. I was much too young to know anything about architecture, Palladian or otherwise, yet even my untutored eye found a deep satisfaction in the proportion of St. James. in its lines and planes and arches, and the way in which the sound of the service echoed under its central dome. That day, the echo threw back the joyful thunder of the organ and the voices of a packed congregation singing, "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," at the top of their lungs. And suddenly, it was Christmas, really Christmas, not just a day for stockings and presents and parties, plum pudding and snapdragon, or even the Christmas tree, but an enormous worldwide birthday party to celebrate the arrival of a baby who had been born in a cattle shed nearly 2,000 years ago, that Savior who is Christ the Lord. All the rest of it was no more than pleasant trimmings tacked on to the birthday celebration, because this was a time of goodwill and rejoicing, and everyone felt generous and jolly and full of optimism. I had, of course, heard the Christmas story, and read it too in a book called The Life of Jesus of Nazareth, beautifully illustrated by a William Hull, R.A. I had both listened to and sung carols, and knew a good many of them by heart, a favorite being Good King Wenceslas. But until this particular Christmas, the true meaning of the Mass of Christ had been swamped by all those exciting trimmings, the presents and the parties, the tinsel and the tangerines. It took "Hark the Herald Angels Sing, Glory to the Newborn King," sung in Sikandar Sahib's church, to bring home to me for the first time what it was really all about. There are other carols, learned much later, that I like better. Christina Rossetti's "In the Bleak Midwinter" for one. But ever since then, no Christmas day has truly been Christmas to me until I have heard or sung "Hark the Herald Angels Sing." I have heard it sung in churches all over the world, in Peking in North China, in churches in India from Kohat in the north to Calcutta in the south, in Kashmir and in Kenya, in Egypt and the Andaman Islands, in Switzerland, Spain, and Austria, and in divided Berlin, as well as in Scotland and England, Ulster and Ireland. Yet every time I hear it, I am back again in that little Palladian church in Old Delhi, with the sunlight streaming down from the windows below the dome, and a long vanished congregation singing the carol that first revealed Christmas to me.